Imagine being born with a defective label slapped on you, sold off like a broken piece of tech. That was the nightmare a young alien girl named Laura Vera lived every single day. But with just 2 words, "I'm not property," spoken in a hushed courtroom, she was about to shatter a corrupt empire across 3 star systems. This is the story of how one silent girl became a legend. Stick around, and I'll show you exactly how she did it. Our journey begins in the notorious Valor Market, a grimy bazaar where everything had a price tag, even souls. A man named Kyle pushed through the throng, the press of bodies almost as thick as the air itself. It was a nasty cocktail of exotic spices, burning metal, and the funk of 1,000 different species sweating under a brutal sun. He swiped at his brow with a greasy hand, his eyes scanning the endless stalls. His patched-up worksuit screamed mechanic, just another guy trying to find a deal on the cheap. A 4-armed huckster dangled a cheap plastic flamingo in his face, claiming it was a genuine relic from Earth. Kyle offered a weak smile, shook his head, and moved on. He had no time for tourist traps. His ship's hyperdrive was totally fried, and Valar, for all its filth and danger, was the only place for 3 days in any direction where he might find a replacement that wouldn't bankrupt him. And then, he saw it. Tucked away in a dark corner, wedged between a stand selling glitchy navigation systems and another peddling used air filters, was a clear shipping container. It wasn't holding spare parts or new gadgets. Stamped across its side in bold red letters was one word: defective. And inside, curled up like a frightened animal, was a little girl with pale blue skin. She was a tiny, silent shadow in the middle of all the noise and chaos. A kid. His search for the hyperdrive vanished from his mind. The container was designed for cargo, not people. It only had a few rough holes punched in the side for ventilation. A small bowl of some gray-looking mush sat untouched inside. "Find a treasure, ground pounder?" a slimy voice hissed next to him. A skeletal merchant appeared, his skin so thin Kyle could see the black throb of his inner workings. "Got some real quality merchandise, not like that junk." But Kyle couldn't look away from the girl. "What's wrong with her?" he asked. The merchant flicked 3 of his 7 fingers. "Her? Total lemon. Returned more times than I can count. Never makes a peep. Doesn't obey orders," the merchant scoffed. "She's headed for recycling tomorrow." The word recycling landed like a punch to the gut. Kyle knew it was a clean word for a dirty business. Places that broke down living beings for parts. "What's her price?" The question was out of his mouth before he could stop it. The merchant's see-through skin went a queasy shade of green. "You want that one? She's a write-off. The disposal fee is—" "How much?" Kyle said again, his voice dangerously quiet. The merchant named a figure that could have bought him a brand new hyperdrive. It was a total rip-off, but Kyle didn't argue. He sent the credits immediately, worried that any hesitation would make him change his mind. "Suit yourself?" the merchant muttered, keying in the code to open the crate with a slimy grin. "And hey, no refunds." With a hiss of compressed air, the door slid open, but the child inside didn't move an inch, her enormous dark eyes glued to the floor. "Hey," Kyle said gently, holding out a hand but keeping his distance. "It's all right. You're safe with me now." There was no response. He waited, then slowly drew his hand back, giving her space. When she still stayed put, he spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "I promise I won't hurt you." This time, something connected. She started to uncoil herself, revealing just how tiny she was. She barely came up to his belt. She was dressed in a drab, formless shift with a barcode stamped over her heart, and her feet were bare and tough from neglect. The merchant tossed a data chip into Kyle's hand. "Title's transferred. She's all yours." Kyle paid him no mind, focused on the girl who was now on her feet, but swaying as if standing was unfamiliar. He could just make out the pale, phantom shapes of old bruises covering her slender arms, a silent testament to a horrific past. "My ship's this way," he said softly. "Can you walk? Or I can carry you." She didn't seem to understand, but when he turned to head for the ship docks, she followed a few paces behind him, moving stiffly, like an animal braced for a hit. He led her to a lower docking bay, a junkyard of beat-up freighters and wheezing delivery drones. His ship, the Starforge, blended in perfectly. She was a 30-year-old hauler he'd turned into a traveling workshop. The hull was a patchwork quilt of metal plates and scavenged components, hence the name. But on the inside, she was pristine. Something Kyle was incredibly proud of. The girl stopped short as they got closer, her eyes growing wide at the ship's rough appearance. Kyle stopped with her. "Here we are," he said, patting the worn lettering on the side. "The Starforge. This is my home. I fix things. I know she's ugly on the outside, but inside, you'll be safe." He prayed she understood the safe part. After a tense beat, she slowly walked up the ramp after him. The inside of the ship was what Kyle called controlled chaos. Tools were stuck to magnetic racks, components were filed away in labeled containers, and a small living area had been set up in the back with a little kitchen, a bathroom, and one bed. The girl stopped right inside the door, her whole body rigid as she scanned her new surroundings. "Well, welcome aboard," Kyle said gently. "Go wherever you want. How about some food?" She said nothing, but he caught her eyes darting to the kitchen area for a fraction of a second. "Right, food it is," he said, making sure his movements were slow and non-threatening. "Have a seat wherever," he told her, as he warmed up a simple meal, some protein broth with a few real vegetables he'd splurged on at the last port. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food. He was careful to move calmly, knowing she was watching his every move. When it was hot, he served it in 2 bowls, setting one on the little pop-up table before sitting down with his. "Hey, this is pretty good," he announced to the empty space. The girl padded over without a sound. But instead of sitting at the table, she carried her bowl to the most distant corner, pressed her back to the wall, and ate with small, cautious sips, like she was afraid someone would take it from her. Kyle made a point to look away to give her some space. After he'd finished eating, he spoke again in that same quiet voice. "I'm Kyle, by the way. I don't know if you have a name or if you can even understand what I'm saying, but yeah. Kyle." She just stared back, her expression unreadable. "We need to leave," he went on. "Valar is not a good place. I know a safe station we can get to. We'll head there and figure things out." He started his pre-flight routine, flipping switches and checking readouts, all while keeping up a one-sided conversation, explaining his tools and tasks, anything to break the heavy silence. Through it all, the girl stayed in her corner, holding her empty bowl, her eyes following him with an intensity that went beyond simple fear. Once the ship was ready, Kyle went back to the main area. "All right, we're taking off. You should probably brace yourself. It gets a little bumpy." He pointed to a cushioned bench with safety straps. After a second, she walked over and set her bowl gently on the deck. She ignored the harnesses but grabbed the side of the bench with a white-knuckled grip. "Good enough," Kyle whispered as he walked to the pilot's seat. The Starforge shuddered to life, its engines groaning as it clawed its way out of the planet's thick atmosphere. In just a few minutes, they were free, and the world of Valor was just a shrinking green and blue ball on the view screen. As soon as they were in open space, Kyle set the autopilot and returned to the cabin. The girl was still clutching the bench, but her attention was now fixed on the breathtaking sea of stars outside the window. "We made it out," he said. "It's about a 30-hour flight to a place called Nexus Haven. You should try to get some rest." He hesitated before continuing softly. "Look, I can't imagine what you've been through, and I don't care what anyone says is wrong with you. I just need you to know that you are safe on this ship. No one will ever put you in a cage again." Her eyes moved from the stars to his. He couldn't read her face, but he saw the tight knot of tension in her shoulders relax. Just a little. A small spark of hope flared in Kyle's heart as he nodded. "Let's get a bed set up for you." From a storage locker beneath his bunk, he grabbed a few clean blankets and a pillow, arranging them into a makeshift bed in a quiet, unused alcove by the workshop. It was just a storage nook, really, but it was secluded and cozy. "It's not the Ritz," he said softly when he was finished, "but it's all yours." He showed her how a heavy curtain could be pulled across the entrance for privacy. "I promise no one's going to bother you in here. And if you need anything, I'm right over there." The girl watched him, her exhausted eyes a mix of suspicion and curiosity, before slowly inching toward the little space. Kyle gave her a gentle nod. "I'm hitting the sack myself," he said. "What a day. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." He walked back to his own bed, giving her the space to decide if this tiny corner of the galaxy could finally be safe. What do you do when you find a child discarded like trash, with a barcode stamped on her neck that literally reads, "Defective"? If you're Kale Vorin, you spend every last credit you have to buy her freedom. He didn't regret it for a single second, but as he collapsed onto his bunk, the massive reality of his choice came crashing down. He knew absolutely nothing about kids, let alone a silent, traumatized alien girl who probably couldn't understand a word he said. Do you think he just made the biggest mistake of his life? You're going to want to stick around for the next 60 seconds, because what happens next changes absolutely everything. Just as sleep started to take him, a faint scraping sound from the workshop jolted him awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. He moved silently through the dim corridor, his feet barely making a sound as he peered around the workshop door. And there she was. The little girl, Elra, stood before his tool bench, her thin, blue fingers hovering just above the polished metal. She wasn't touching a thing, just observing with a look of intense, silent fascination. The moment she sensed him, she went rigid, and a look of pure animal terror washed over her face. "Whoa, hey, it's okay," Kale whispered, keeping his voice low and calm. "You're not in trouble at all. I just heard a sound." She was frozen solid, her wide, dark eyes glued to him, coiled like she was ready to spring away at any second. "You a fan of tools?" he tried, taking one slow, deliberate step into the room. "I could show you what some of them do, if you want." She didn't say a word, but she also didn't run. For Kale, that was a monumental victory. "See this gadget?" he said, pointing to a sleek device on the bench. "That's a molecular sealer. Think of it like a high-tech Band-Aid for patching tiny holes in the ship's hull." He then gestured to a much larger piece of equipment. "And that big guy is a diagnostic scanner. It's like a doctor for the engines, tells me what's wrong when they start sputtering." Her gaze followed his every movement, the raw fear in her eyes slowly giving way to genuine interest. That was all the green light he needed. Kale continued, explaining each tool in the simplest terms he could think of, his calm voice trying to build a bridge across the silence between them. After he'd gone through the entire workbench, he paused. "Can you understand what I'm saying? Are you able to talk?" Laura's eyes dropped to the floor, but it didn't seem like fear this time. It felt more like she was hiding something. "That's all right," Kale said gently. "No pressure. But it would be nice to know what to call you. Do you have a name?" The silence that followed felt heavy enough to have its own gravity. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "I can't just keep calling you kid. How about I give you a temporary name, just until we get things sorted?" Her eyes flickered up to meet his for a fraction of a second, before darting away again. "I'm taking that as a maybe," he said with a tired smile. "Okay, how about—" Just then, a soft chime echoed from the cockpit as the autopilot made a minor course correction. Kale headed toward the front of the ship, and Laura trailed behind him like a tiny, silent shadow. As he adjusted their trajectory, he saw how utterly mesmerized she was by the glowing 3D star chart. Once he was done, he turned the holographic display so she could see it better. See that little blinking dot? That's us, he explained, tapping the icon of his ship, the Starforge. And we're headed right there. He traced their flight path to a port city called Nexus Haven. It's a safe place, an independent station. No corporate thugs from Valar are allowed. Lura just stared at the swirling map of stars, her hand twitching as if she was fighting an overwhelming urge to touch the lights. Go ahead, Kale encouraged softly. You can't hurt it. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out. Her slender blue fingers passed right through the hologram. The light danced and swirled around her hand, and for the very first time, a spark of pure wonder lit up her face. It's just light, Kale said with a small smile. Just a fancy map to help us find our way through all this dark. She pulled her hand back, but continued to stare at the map, completely lost in the sea of stars. You like maps and navigation? Kale asked. He got no reply. Hold on, I have something for you, he said, leading her back toward the workshop. He rummaged through a drawer full of spare parts and pulled out a small, tarnished metal pin. It was an old Earthfleet navigator's insignia, worn with age but still dignified. This belonged to my dad, he told her, holding it out in his palm. He used to plot courses for the big interstellar freighters. He's the one who taught me how to fly, and how to put things back together when they break. Lura leaned in to get a closer look, her head tilting with that quiet curiosity he was quickly coming to cherish. Here, Kale said, placing it on the workbench between them. It's yours if you want it. He took a step back to give her space. After a long moment, she reached out. Her touch was surprisingly delicate as she picked up the pin, turning it over and over in her small hands. It's yours now, he repeated softly. Maybe it'll help you find your way too. Lura clutched the pin tightly to her chest, and for just a second, he saw the defensive walls in her eyes crumble. To Kale, it felt like watching a sunrise. All right, time for some breakfast, he announced, his voice suddenly cheerful. And I mean real food this time, not that disgusting nutrient paste. He whipped up some rehydrated eggs and toast. It wasn't five-star dining, but it was a definite upgrade. He set a plate on the table and sat down with his own. This time, Lura approached the table with less hesitation, though she still chose a chair in the corner, placing the navigator's pin on the table right next to her plate. We should reach Nexus Haven in about 24 hours, Kale said between bites of toast. It's neutral territory, and I know a few good doctors there. I was thinking we could get you checked out when we arrive. The word doctors made her freeze up instantly, her eyes going wide with a familiar panic. Whoa, not those kind of doctors, Kale said quickly, keeping his tone perfectly level. Just a friendly checkup to make sure you're healthy. No scary machines, no needles. I swear. And I'll be right there with you the whole time. The terror in her eyes subsided a bit, and she cautiously returned to her food. After they finished eating, the financial reality of his situation landed on Kale like a ton of bricks. Freeing Elra had wiped him out completely. They had just enough fuel to coast into Nexus Haven, and after that, his accounts were dry. He needed to find work, and fast. Time to check the job boards, he muttered to himself, pulling up the interstellar network on his main console. As he scrolled through dozens of repair contracts, Lura came to stand quietly by his side. Aha, here we go, he said, pointing at the screen. A freighter needs a new drive coupling installed. That's an easy job, and the pay is decent. Her eyes followed his finger, then flicked over to his toolkit hanging on the wall. And that spark of intense curiosity was back. You want to see how these things work for real? Kale asked, noticing her gaze. He laid the kit open on the workbench and began explaining the function of each tool. To his amazement, Ilara stepped right up, her full attention on him as he demonstrated how to use a delicate micro-adjuster. Want to try? He offered. She only hesitated for a heartbeat before taking it from his hand. Her small fingers closed around the tool not with the awkwardness of a child, but with a strange, practiced confidence that sent a chill down his spine. He showed her a simple calibration procedure, and she mirrored his movements flawlessly. "Whoa," Cale breathed out, completely stunned. "You're a natural. Have you done this before?" She offered no answer, but a new, focused intensity burned in her eyes. It was another piece of the puzzle, a clear sign that she was so much more than the defective label someone had branded her with. They spent the next several hours like that. Cale would demonstrate a repair, and Illyra would absorb the information, sometimes even assisting. She remained completely silent, but he could see the tension leaving her body. At one point, she perfectly executed a very tricky diagnostic sequence, and he could have sworn he saw a flicker of pride on her face. As evening approached, Cale made dinner. He couldn't help but smile when Illyra sat down at the actual table with him this time, even if she still kept to the opposite end. "You know," he said conversationally, "I still don't have a name for you. And just calling you kid in my head doesn't feel right." A thought struck him. He went to a storage locker and pulled out a small, handheld metal engraving kit. It was a little hobby he'd picked up to kill time on long-haul flights. "Look," he said, laying the tools out. "I could make you a nameplate, something permanent, like my dad's pin." He sketched a small rectangle on a data pad. "If you know your name, you could try writing it down. Or I could list off some names, and you could just point to one you like." Lyra stared at his drawing, then slowly reached for a stylus. Cale felt like he was holding his breath. She gripped the tool, a bit awkwardly at first, then began to etch onto the pad. But these weren't childish scribbles. They were elegant, complex symbols, flowing across the screen with a grace and purpose he couldn't begin to comprehend. When she was done, she pushed the pad toward him. Is this your name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She gave him a single, tiny nod. I can't read it," Cale admitted, his mind reeling with a million new questions. "I can carve it exactly like the writing you showed me, if you'd like." Was that what she wanted? She gave another nod, this one sharper, more resolute. His hands were rock steady as he carefully etched the elegant, flowing symbols into a small silver plate. When he finished, he attached a pin to the back. "There you go," he said, holding it out to her. "It's your name." Ra took the badge with a reverence that just about broke his heart. Her tiny fingers traced the engraved lines as if she were rediscovering a lost piece of her own soul. "Can you try saying it for me?" Cale asked, his voice incredibly soft. She hesitated, her lips trembling as if the sound was caught in her throat, but nothing came out. "Hey, it's all right," he said quickly. "No pressure. Take all the time you need." She carefully pinned the badge to her tunic, placing it right over her heart, completely covering the cruel, ugly barcode that had been branded into her skin. "It's so good to finally meet you," Kel said, his voice radiating a gentle warmth. "I'm really, truly glad you're here with me." That night, Lyra slept soundly for the first time in ages, tucked into the small bunk Kel had prepared for her. He'd even hung a curtain to give her a bit of privacy, creating a tiny sanctuary for her within the ship's main cabin. He noticed that even in her sleep, she was clutching the old navigator's insignia he'd given her alongside her brand-new nameplate, holding them as if they were anchors to her new life. The next morning, a soft chime woke them during breakfast. They were approaching Nexus Haven. Kel got up and headed for the cockpit, and Lara followed right behind him, a silent little shadow in a routine that already felt surprisingly normal. "And there she is," he announced, pointing at the main view screen, where a massive wheel-shaped space station was slowly rotating in orbit around a desolate moon. Its polished hull shone like a diamond against the black velvet of space. Nexus Haven was one of the last truly free ports in this entire sector of the galaxy. A massive, spinning ring of a station, turning in silence against the stark backdrop of a dead moon. It was a rare beacon of safety in a galaxy filled with predators. Kel handled the docking procedures like the veteran pilot he was, his voice calm and professional as he communicated with station control to get their clearance. As his ship, the Starforge, glided toward its assigned docking ring, he glanced over at El-Ra. Her small body was stiff with tension, her wide, dark eyes darting everywhere at once. "You're safe here," he promised, his voice a steady anchor in her sea of fear. "Nobody is ever going to take you away again. You're with me now, and I swear on my life, nothing is ever going to hurt you again." She looked up at him, her gaze scanning his face, searching for any hint of a lie. And for the very first time since he'd found her, Kel saw something new flicker in those eyes, a tiny spark of trust, like a fragile seedling pushing its way up through cracked, dry earth. The Starforge connected to the station with a gentle thud, and the hiss of the airlocks pressurizing filled the quiet cabin. Kel ran through the final shutdown sequence, then stood up and stretched, working out the kinks from the long journey. "Well, kiddo, we made it," he said with a warm smile. "Ready to go check it out?" Laura hesitated for only a second. Her small hand hovered in the air between them before she reached out and took his. It was the first time she had ever initiated contact. Her cool fingers wrapped around his palm, her grip both hesitant and surprisingly firm. Kel felt a lump form in his throat, blindsided by a sudden, powerful wave of protectiveness. "All right then," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but it felt like the strongest promise he had ever made. "Let's go together." They stepped out of the airlock and onto the deck of Nexus Haven, Laura's hand held tightly in his. Her new silver name badge gleamed on her chest, a tiny beacon of her new beginning. It was the first step on a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Unlike the filthy, dangerous alleyways of Valor, Nexus Haven was buzzing with light and life. It was a cosmic crossroads where thousands of different species and cultures came together under a strict code of neutrality. Here, even the most bitter enemies could do business without worrying about a plasma bolt in the back. Laura's grip on his hand tightened as they walked into the grand concourse. Her eyes went wide, trying to absorb the sight of the enormous curved chamber filled with a flowing river of alien beings. Above them, transparent panels offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the stars, while below, glowing aqueducts pulsed with recycled water like the station's very own circulatory system. "It's okay," Kel murmured, slowing his stride to match her tiny, uncertain steps. "Nobody's paying any attention to us. We're just a couple of travelers passing through." That wasn't entirely true, of course. They did get a few curious looks. Humans weren't exactly common in this part of the galaxy, so a human man traveling with a little blue-skinned girl was bound to turn a few heads. But the #1 rule of Nexus Haven was to mind your own business, and most folks looked away after a moment. Their first stop was a public records terminal. Kel slid the data chip he'd acquired from the merchant on Valar into the port. He had to know the truth. Who had they sold him? And what was Laura's official legal standing? The machine hummed for a second before a series of documents appeared on the screen, and the words that scrolled by made Kel's blood run ice cold. During her transport from the Zephyr 4 system, Laura had been legally classified as specialized agricultural equipment. It was a disgusting, cynical loophole that turned a living, breathing child into mere cargo. The records showed she had been sold 5 separate times in just 5 years. Each time she was returned with a list of complaints. Unresponsive, inefficient, communication error. Her final transfer, the one to Kel, had her logged as salvage, material considered beyond all hope of repair. "This is disgusting," he whispered, a hot wave of pure fury washing over him. "You are not equipment. You are a person." Laura just stared at the screen, her expression a complete blank, but he could feel the immense weight of her silent pain. Without a second's hesitation, Kel copied the files to his private datapad and then permanently wiped every last trace of them from the public network. The fewer breadcrumbs they left for anyone to follow, the better. "Come on," he said, forcing his voice to be gentle again despite the rage boiling inside him. Let's get you some proper clothes. They made their way to the market district, a vibrant, chaotic maze of shops that sold everything from starship components to exotic alien foods. Kel wasn't wealthy, but he had enough for the essentials. In a small shop that specialized in children's clothing, they found simple, comfortable outfits that would fit Laura perfectly, clothes that would give her some dignity, unlike the rough, shapeless sack she'd been forced to wear. The shopkeeper, a spindly creature with multiple arms and huge, shimmering compound eyes, bagged their items without a single question. "Would the little one perhaps like a toy?" the shopkeeper chirped as Kel was paying. "We have amusements for nearly every known species." Kel glanced over at Laura. She was standing perfectly still, captivated by a display of complex mechanical puzzles. Seeing that flicker of pure childish curiosity felt like watching a tiny flower bloom in the middle of a desert. "You want one of those?" he asked her softly. He was stunned when she immediately nodded, pointing a small finger at a particularly intricate-looking web of gears and levers. "An excellent selection," the shopkeeper buzzed approvingly. "A puzzle for a sharp mind." Kel added it to their purchase, a deep warmth spreading through his chest as he watched Laura clutch the small package so carefully on their way out. Their next stop was the medical bay, a visit Kel had been dreading. Just as he'd feared, Laura froze at the entrance, her entire body locking up with a fear so intense it was almost a physical force. "We don't have to go in if you don't want to," Kel said softly, keeping his voice low and calm. "But it's probably a good idea just to make sure you're okay. I promise you, nobody in there is going to hurt you." Her eyes were glued to the medical symbol above the door, filled with a look of absolute terror. Kel knelt down to her level so she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "How about a deal? We just go in and talk to the doctor. No scans, no machines, just a conversation. The second you want to leave, we walk right out. No questions asked. Deal?" It took a long, heavy moment, but she finally gave him the tiniest possible nod. Kel gave her hand a reassuring squeeze and led her inside. The clinic was bright, clean, and peaceful, with several waiting areas designed to accommodate a wide range of species. A receptionist with smooth, scaly skin and elegantly long fingers greeted them with a polite smile. "Hi, we were hoping to see a doctor," Kel explained. "Just a general checkup, but we need someone who has experience with her species." It hit him then that he didn't even know what her people were called. The receptionist gave Laura a quick, professional assessment. "Cerulean physiology," they stated matter-of-factly. "Dr. Hélène is our specialist in humanoid variants. She has an opening right now, if that works for you." "That's perfect, thank you," Kel said, feeling a wave of relief that they weren't being hit with a barrage of invasive questions. Dr. Ellen was tall and slender, with shimmering silver skin and eyes that seemed to shift in color. Right now, they were a calming shade of blue that Kel hoped would put Laura at ease. "Welcome," the doctor said, her voice melodic and soothing. "You're here for a wellness check?" "Yes," Kel confirmed. "But she's been through a lot. She was terrified of doctors, and you couldn't blame her." Dr. Hélène's eyes softened, shifting to a gentle green. "I understand completely," she said, her voice like a balm. "We will take this as slow as you need." She turned her full attention to the little girl, Laura. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" Laura's hand went straight to the new silver badge on her tunic, her small fingers tracing the letters, but she said nothing. "She doesn't speak," Kel explained, his voice low. "At least, not since I've known her." "I see," the doctor replied, her eyes fading back to a calming blue. "A voice is often the last thing to come home after a great trauma. It just needs to feel safe again." She pointed to a padded examination table. "Would you be willing to sit up here for me? I promise I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing before I do it." Laura glanced at Kel, who gave her a warm, encouraging nod. Hesitantly, she climbed onto the table, her body tensed like a cornered animal, ready to flee at any moment. Dr. Helene was true to her word. She explained everything, moving a handheld scanner over Laura's skin without ever touching her. Her voice was a steady, soothing hum in the quiet room. "Well, you're a cerulean," she confirmed after a moment. "From Zephyr 4, it looks like. Your people are some of the most brilliant engineers in the galaxy." A flicker of something, maybe pride, danced in Laura's eyes. "In human years, she's about 9, the doctor told Kel. "She's malnourished and has a few minor mineral deficiencies, but nothing serious. A couple months of good meals will fix her right up." "We can do that," Kel said, relief washing over him so strongly he felt lightheaded. "Is that all?" "There's one other thing," Dr. Helene said, and her eyes darkened to a deep, worried purple. "My scan is showing a subdermal implant, right at the base of her skull. It's a neural suppressor. It's built to shut down parts of the brain." Kel's relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of rage in his gut. "What parts?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "On a cerulean?" the doctor said grimly. "A device like this is used to block their ability to speak and to control their own emotions. They're outlawed in every civilized system." "Can you get it out?" Kel demanded. "Yes, but it requires a specialist and equipment I don't have. I can refer you to a hospital on New Geneva." "No," Kel said instantly. "No big hospitals. Is there anyone on this station who can do it?" Dr. Helene's eyes swirled with a rainbow of colors as she thought. "There's a technician. Kuran," she said finally. "Down in the lower levels. He's not exactly conventional, but the man is a genius. His shop is on level 32, section 7. Look for a bright blue door. Tell him I sent you." She then looked directly at Laura, her voice gentle but firm. "This is your choice, little one. The procedure to remove it is safe, but it might feel strange. But the freedom it would give you, that could change everything." Laura's eyes fell to the simple badge on her chest. After a long, quiet moment, she looked up at the doctor and gave a single, decisive nod. "A plan it is," Dr. Helene smiled. "For now, take these." She handed Kyle a small bottle of light green tablets. "Nutritional supplements, one every day until they're gone. They'll help get her strength back," the doctor added. "Thank you," Kyle said, his voice thick with gratitude. "Seriously, for everything." As they left the clinic, Laura walked with a new purpose. She kept her hand clutched tightly in Kyle's, but her mind was clearly somewhere else. "Hey, we don't have to rush down to see this Kuran guy," he told her gently. "We can go back to the ship, let you rest." But Laura just shook her head and pointed down, toward the humming, industrial heart of the station. She had made her decision. "Let's get you settled first," Kyle tried again. "Besides, I need to grab some supplies for the Starforge." Laura didn't budge. She just shook her head again, pointing downward with a fierce determination that seemed to vibrate through her small hand. "You really want to go right now?" Kyle asked, surprised by her intensity. She gave him another one of those firm, unwavering nods. "All right then," he said, trusting her gut. "If you're sure, let's go." They rode a rattling cargo lift down to level 32, and the entire atmosphere shifted. The gleaming chrome and bright lights of the upper station were gone, replaced by the station's raw, mechanical guts. Massive pipes and thick bundles of cables crisscrossed the ceilings. Steam hissed from exposed vents, and the floor vibrated with the constant, low thrum of powerful machinery. Section 7 was a cramped corridor filled with loud workshops and cluttered repair bays. But just like the doctor said, one door stood out, painted a vibrant, defiant blue, and marked only with a strange sequence of numbers. Kyle knocked. A second later, the door slid open into a workshop that was a masterpiece of organized chaos. Starship parts were piled next to delicate medical scanners. Engine components were tangled up with communication arrays, and Kuran, the technician, was not what Kyle had expected. He was a short, stocky being, with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like chainmail. Two of his hands were buried deep inside a console, a third held a diagnostic tool, and the fourth was adjusting an overhead lamp. "What?" he grunted, his voice like rocks grinding together. He didn't bother to look up. "If this is about the atmospheric regulators, tell maintenance they can wait until morning." "Dr. Allen sent us," Kyle said. "It's about a neural suppressor." That got his attention. All four arms stopped moving. He turned, and his large, multifaceted eyes locked onto them, finally settling on Elora with a piercing curiosity. "Ellen sent you. Now that is interesting." His gruff tone softened just a fraction as he looked at the little girl. "A neural suppressor, huh? My guess is it targets speech and emotional regulation. A nasty favorite of the slavers out in the outer sectors." Laura met his gaze without flinching, a fire in her eyes that was far bigger than her tiny frame. "Can you remove it?" Kyle asked, hope rising in his chest. "Of course," Karan said, setting his tools down as if it were no big deal. "It's a simple extraction. 15 minutes tops. There won't be any permanent damage. She should have a full neural recovery in a few days." He gestured to a sturdy chair in the center of the room. "Have a seat, kid. I'll talk you through the whole thing." With that same silent resolve, Laura walked over and climbed into the chair, showing not a single trace of fear. Karan adjusted the chair's height, one arm grabbing a scanner, while another prepped a tray of gleaming instruments. "The device is right here," he said, pointing to an image on a nearby screen. It was a tiny spider-like implant at the base of her neck, wired directly into her brainstem. "Think of it like a dam, blocking certain signals in her brain," he explained. "My job is just to remove the dam and let the river flow again." "Will it hurt her?" Kyle asked, stepping forward instinctively. "She'll feel a tiny pinch," Karan promised. "That's all." He looked Laura right in her eyes, his voice now surprisingly gentle. "I use a local anesthetic and very, very precise tools. You'll feel a little pressure, maybe some tingling, but no pain. If you want me to stop for any reason, just raise your hand. Got it?" Laura nodded, her gaze steady. "Good. Let's get this thing out of you." He worked with incredible speed and precision. His four arms moved in a perfect fluid symphony, locating the implant, deactivating it, and gently extracting the foul piece of technology. He narrated every step in a calm, steady voice that kept Laura completely at ease. When he was done, Karan held up the implant, a metallic disc smaller than a fingernail, glinting under the workshop light. "There," he said. "It's done. The inhibitor is gone." Laura slowly raised a hand and gently touched the small bandage on the back of her neck. Her face was a mixture of relief and pure, unadulterated wonder. "Recovery is different for everyone," Karan said as he dropped the implant into a disposal unit where it sizzled and dissolved. "Sometimes the change is instant. Sometimes it takes a few days for those neural pathways to wake up and remember how to work. Just be patient with her." "Thank you," Kyle said, pulling up his payment chit. "What do we owe you?" Karan named a price that was incredibly low. "Friends of Alen get a discount," he said, his metallic scales rippling in what Kyle assumed was a shrug. "Besides, I can't stand those things." As they left the workshop, Laura seemed to walk a little taller, a new lightness in her step. She was still silent, but every so often, Kyle saw her touch her throat, as if reacquainting herself with a part of her she thought she had lost forever. "How are you feeling?" he asked as the lift hummed quietly, carrying them back to the polished upper levels. She gave a little uncertain wave with her hand, which he interpreted as different, or maybe changing. "Good," Kyle said with a warm smile. "Change can be a very, very good thing." They went back to the Starforge to drop off their supplies. Elora immediately went to her room and changed into a new, deep blue jumpsuit, an outfit that looked 1,000 times more like her than the drab gray tunic she'd arrived in. After she ate, she curled up in her sleeping nook with her puzzle bossies, pulling the curtain almost completely shut, finally safe and whole once more. While Laura got some rest, Kyle scrolled through the job boards on Nexus Haven. He snagged a gig for the next morning almost instantly. Just some basic life support maintenance on an old freighter. Easy money. As he was looking over the details, he heard a faint noise coming from her alcove. It wasn't a word, not quite, but a soft, curious hum. The sound of a voice trying to remember how to work after being locked away for who knows how long. He smartly pretended he didn't hear it, giving her the space to rediscover it on her own. As the ship's lights dimmed for the night cycle, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling of how much his world had turned upside down. A week ago, he was just another mechanic drifting through the stars. Now, he was the sole protector of a courageous little blue girl from a species he knew almost nothing about. What would she be like when she finally started talking? Would she want to go back to Zephyr 4, that moon the doc had mentioned? Was there a family out there somewhere, desperately searching for her? Or had they snatched her when she was so little that home was just a word without a memory? The questions circled in his mind as he drifted off to sleep, but a piercing beep from the comms panel shot him wide awake. It was a high-priority alert. Frowning, Kyle walked over to the console and answered the call. The face looking back at him was humanoid, but its skin was a sickly pale, and its eyes were a piercing, ice-cold blue. "Is this the vessel registered as the Starforge?" the man asked, his voice completely robotic and devoid of emotion. "It is," Kyle replied, his defenses already up. "Who's asking?" "My name is not important. I am a representative of Varcon Industries. We have received a notification that you are in possession of an item that is the property of my employer." Kyle felt a cold knot of fury tighten in his stomach. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The man's face remained a perfect, emotionless mask. "A cerulean unit, designation S392. Our records indicate you came into possession of this unit on Valar 3 days ago. That transaction was not authorized. The seller had no legal right. The unit was and remains the legal property of Varcon Industries." "She is not a unit," Kyle shot back, his voice thick with rage. "She's a little girl, a person." "That is a subjective assessment," the representative stated, without a trace of feeling. "Under Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C, ceruleans are legally classified as specialized equipment, not sentient beings. My employer requires the immediate return of his property." "That's not happening," Kyle said, his voice low and dangerous. The man's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "This is not a negotiation. Varcon Industries has already filed a formal reclamation request with Station Command. You will surrender the unit, or you will face significant legal consequences. Station security has been dispatched." The transmission ended with an abrupt click, leaving Kyle staring at his own tense reflection on the dark screen. He let out a curse, then spun around to see LRA standing just outside her small room. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she was clutching that horrible identification tag to her chest like it was a shield. "You heard all of that, didn't you?" he asked, his voice softening instantly. She just nodded, her entire body trembling. Kyle crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt down in front of her. "Now, you listen to me," he said, his voice filled with a fierce determination. "I am not going to let them take you, do you understand? Not now, not ever. I don't care what they try to pull, you are safe here with me." Her terrified eyes searched his, desperate for a reason to believe him. "I promise," he added, his voice heavy with the weight of the vow. "We will find a way through this, together." Just then the airlock chime echoed through the ship. They had company. Kyle shot to his feet, putting himself between LRA and the main hatch. "Stay behind me," he whispered, and walked to the control panel. The external camera showed 2 station security officers in standard gray uniforms. They were armed, but their weapons were holstered. Kyle let out a long, shaky breath and hit the switch to open the door. It hissed open, and the lead officer stepped inside. "Are you Citizen Kyle Vorin?" he asked, his expression completely neutral. "I am," Kyle said, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. It all started with a knock that sounded like fate itself pounding on the door. Two station officers stood there with stone-cold faces, informing Kyle they were there to confiscate his property. But they weren't after his ship or his tools. They were there for the little girl desperately trying to hide behind his legs. A massive corporation called Varkon Industries was claiming ownership of her. Kyle had just rescued this child from a living nightmare, and now these corporate monsters wanted to drag her right back into it. He had no money, no powerful friends, and no idea how to fight a legal giant. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't backing down. And you're going to want to see how this plays out, because what Kyle did next is a story that proves that sometimes all it takes is one person's courage to challenge an entire system. They were escorted down sterile corridors to a hearing room that felt as cold and unforgiving as a cryo chamber. The whole place had the faint metallic smell of recycled air and bureaucratic indifference. On one side of a long, polished table sat two men, a lawyer whose suit was as sharp as his predatory grin, and another man dressed in clothes so absurdly expensive he could only be Mr. Varkon himself, a man who practically radiated arrogance. Kyle gently guided LRA to the seats on the opposite side. He could feel her trembling uncontrollably, so he placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, hoping to communicate what words couldn't, that he was right there with her, and he wasn't going anywhere. "Please state your names for the record," a clerk droned. "Kyle Vorin," he said, his voice solid. The clerk's gaze flicked toward LRA. "And the disputed asset?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "She is not an asset. Her name is LRA." The corporate lawyer immediately interjected, his voice as smooth and pleasant as gravel. "The unit's designation is S392. It is the legal property of Varkon Industries, and this man is a common thief." Before Kyle could fire back, a side door slid open and the Arbiter made its entrance. It wasn't a person at all. It was a colossal, bioluminescent, jellyfish-like being, its glowing brain and organs clearly visible through its translucent body. The enormous creature drifted to its position behind the main bench, its tendrils connecting directly into the console. "This hearing is now in session," a synthesized voice announced. "I have reviewed the ownership claim filed by Varkon Industries. You may present your case." The lawyer, a man named Zarin, rose to his feet with the confidence of a shark that smells blood in the water. "Arbiter Jean, our case is remarkably simple. The unit in question was lawfully acquired by my client 6 years ago. Under current quadrant law, it is classified as a piece of advanced agricultural machinery." He allowed himself a small, condescending smirk. "You could think of it as an exceptionally intelligent piece of farm equipment." Zarin slid a data chip across the table, and its contents flashed onto a large screen for all to see. Purchase orders, registration numbers, a cold, clinical history of LRA's existence, all boiled down to entries on a corporate ledger. This documentation provides irrefutable proof of our ownership. There is no record of an authorized sale or transfer. Therefore, this individual has zero legal claim to our property. The evidence looked airtight, a fortress of legal code designed and put to extinguish any spark of hope. And throughout his entire presentation, Zarin never once glanced at LRA, treating the terrified little girl sitting just feet away as if she were completely invisible. "Citizen Vorin," the Arbiter's synthesized voice boomed. "Do you possess any evidence to refute this claim?" Kyle stood, his heart pounding. All he had was the flimsy digital receipt from that shady dealer on the back streets of Valar. He pushed his own data chip forward. Zarin barely gave it a glance before letting out a dismissive chuckle. "As you can clearly see, the vendor in question possessed no legal authority to sell company property. This receipt is utterly meaningless." Kyle felt his stomach plummet. The smug lawyer was right. According to the law, he was completely sunk. "You're missing the entire point!" Kyle shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "Look at her! Just look! She's a person, a living, breathing child. She has feelings, she feels fear, and she deserves to be free. Your laws can call her a machine until you're blue in the face, but every single one of us in this room knows it's a lie." His words hung in the suffocating silence of the room, a desperate plea to a system that had no soul. He wasn't just fighting for her anymore. He was fighting for the very idea of her humanity. The arbiter's glowing brain pulsed rhythmically. "Arguments rooted in morality are not applicable in this hearing," the translator declared. "This is a dispute of legal ownership. If you are unable to provide proof that your acquisition of the unit was lawful, I will have no alternative but to rule in favor of Varkon." The walls felt like they were closing in. In a last-ditch effort, Kyle played the only card he had left. "They hurt her. I have proof. The station medical examiner discovered a device implanted at the base of her skull, a neural suppressor specifically designed to physically prevent her from speaking." Zorin simply rolled his eyes. "That is a standard-issue component, not a torture device. The unit's vocal capabilities are disabled by default to optimize workplace efficiency." But before he could finish that vile sentence, Varkon himself slammed his fist on the table. "I've heard enough of this nonsense. Arbiter, the law is clear. Return my property to me, now!" The arbiter paused for a moment before delivering the final, crushing verdict. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds in favor of Varkon Industries. Citizen Vorin, you will surrender the unit immediately." The guards were closing in, their heavy boots echoing on the polished floor. It was really, truly over. A crushing wave of defeat washed over Kale as he dropped to one knee to meet Laura's eyes, searching for words of comfort that just weren't there. An officer reached out to grab her small arm, and right then, in that dead-still room, it happened. A tiny voice, barely a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the silence, said, "I am not a unit." Everyone froze. The guards, the lawyers, even the smug Mr. Varkon. They all just stared, jaws slack, at the little girl who wasn't supposed to be able to speak. Laura took a single, deliberate step toward the massive holographic judge. "My name," she said, her voice gaining strength with every syllable, "is Lura, and I am not your property." An electric silence filled the courtroom. The judge's avatar flickered through a rainbow of colors, its logic circuits clearly struggling to process this impossible new piece of information. Kale saw his chance. "Your Honor," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger. "Their entire case is built on a lie. They submitted doctored records claiming she couldn't speak. That's fraud." The judge's synthesized voice boomed back, but this time it was sharp, laced with something new. "The records from Varkon Industries now appear to be deliberately falsified. To classify a speaking, self-aware individual as equipment is a severe breach of interstellar law." Zarin, the lawyer, started sweating buckets, stammering about some simple filing error, but it was way too late for excuses. The judge delivered its verdict. The claim from Varkon Industries is rejected. Mr. Varkon and his legal counsel are to be taken into custody immediately, pending a full investigation into charges of slavery and perjury. The two guards exchanged a look of stunned disbelief, then pure satisfaction, as they slapped a pair of glowing cuffs on the two villains. An hour later, Kale and Laura walked out of that courtroom, hand in hand, finally and completely free. The station had granted Kale full guardianship. They stood by a massive window, gazing out at the endless stream of stars. He gently squeezed her hand. "So," he said, his voice soft, "what do you want to do now?" For the first time since he'd met her, Lara looked up at him and offered a small, real smile. It was the perfect proof that no matter how powerful evil seems, the truth, even when it starts as a whisper, can be strong enough to make empires fall. With each word, her voice grew from a frightened whisper into a powerful declaration. "My name is Laura Vera. I was born on Zephyr 4, not built in a factory. They stole me from my family when I was only 3 years old. I am a person, not a piece of hardware." The security officer, John, was a chrome android whose internal fans whirred loudly as it struggled to compute this reality-bending event. Its translator crackled, "The unit is speaking." Laura locked her eyes onto its glowing sensors, her voice now as firm as stone. "I speak. I could always speak until they forced this thing into my head. It hurt. It stole my words and made my thoughts foggy. They called me broken because I wouldn't obey, because I never stopped trying to get away." She slowly raised a steady hand, pointing an unwavering finger directly at Mr. Varkon. "He's the one," she said. "He bought me, and he bought so many other children just like me. He paid to have these suppressors implanted in our brains so we couldn't scream for help. He made us work in his refineries on Valar, forcing us to sort through toxic waste with our bare hands because we were cheaper than machines." Varkon's face twisted into an ugly snarl. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "The unit is clearly malfunctioning, its circuits probably fried by whatever back-alley junker messed with it." Lura's voice cut back, sharp and clear. "I am not an it. I am a girl. I am a cerulean. My people are builders and artists, not items to be bought and sold. What Varkon is doing is illegal under the Galactic Autonomy Accord, and that law is more powerful than any local business deal." Kale just stared, his mind completely blown. How on earth did she know about interstellar law? How did this quiet, terrified little girl suddenly turn into a legal expert? Officer John's translator clicked and whirred. "The Galactic Autonomy Accord does forbid the enslavement of sentient species," it confirmed. "However, ceruleans are officially classified as non-sentient under Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C. That classification was bought with bribes and lies," Laura shot back, her voice not wavering for a second. "Companies like Varkon Industries pay off officials to label us as property so they can get rich off our work. It's a direct violation of the Accord's own definition of sentience, self-awareness, complex language, abstract thought, and knowing right from wrong. I'm proving I have all 4 of those things just by talking to you right now." Zarin, Varkon's lawyer, leaped to his feet, his calm, professional mask finally shattering. "This is outrageous. The unit has obviously been programmed with these lines. Officer John, I insist you end this farce immediately and return my client's property," he demanded, his voice dripping with arrogance. But John simply raised one metallic hand, silencing him. The officer's lights pulsed. "One moment," its translator said. "The Galactic Autonomy Accord is crystal clear. Any being that shows the 4 signs of sentience, self-awareness, language, abstract thought, and moral agency must be given basic rights, no matter what it was classified as before. This situation creates a legal contradiction." Varkon's face was turning a frightening shade of red. "There is no contradiction," he hissed. "The unit is property. Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C says so." But Lura's voice sliced through his anger, clean and steady. "I request a sentience evaluation." Those 5 words hung in the air, ringing in the sudden, total silence of the room. Under Article 7 of the Accord, any individual who claims to be sentient has the right to an official test. If I pass, you can't legally call me property anymore. John's limbs gave a slight twitch of surprise, its lights glowing even brighter. "The individual is correct," the translator announced. "Article 7 does guarantee the right to that evaluation. This has never happened before." "This is insanity," Varkon sputtered, his face now a deep purple. "It's just repeating legal terms it can't possibly understand. Someone has been messing with its programming." Lura's eyes burned with a fire he'd never seen. "I understand because I listened," she declared, her voice rising like a tidal wave. "Back on Valar, the supervisors would play legal news broadcasts over the speakers all day long while we worked. I listened to every single word. I memorized all of it. I couldn't speak, but I could still think." She turned her gaze back to Officer Jean, her small body radiating an incredible strength. "I request sanctuary under Article 7 until my evaluation can be done. Varkon has already shown he will hurt me to keep me quiet." John's internal circuits hummed loudly as it processed this formal legal request. After a long, tense moment, the officer finally spoke. "The request for a sentience evaluation is granted under Article 7 of the Galactic Autonomy Accord. Until the test is finished, the individual known as Lyra Vera will be placed in neutral custody. Neither Varkon Industries nor Citizen Kale Bourne can remove her from the jurisdiction of this station." Varkon completely lost it, lunging from his chair with a roar of pure rage. "This is an outrage! I will not stand for this legal circus. You will return my property to me now, or this entire station is going to regret it." "Your threat is noted and on the record," John replied, its voice perfectly calm. "However, Nexus Haven is neutral ground, and we are bound to uphold the Galactic Autonomy Accord. When a claim of sentience is made, that accord overrules any and all trade agreements. My decision is final." Varkon shot a look of pure hatred at Lyra, and then at Kale, his eyes promising revenge. Then he spun around and stormed out of the room, his lawyer scrambling behind him. John turned its attention to Kale and Laura. "The sentience evaluation will happen tomorrow, overseen by a qualified panel. Until then, Lyra Vera will stay in protective custody in the station's neutral zone." Laura's voice suddenly became small again, the scared little girl peeking through. Can I stay with Kale? He saved me. I trust him." John seemed to consider this, its lights blinking thoughtfully. "Citizen Bourne has no official standing as her guardian, but given these unique circumstances, I will allow him to join you in the neutral quarters as an observer. Station security will be posted outside to guarantee your safety." "Thank you," Laura whispered, a wave of relief washing over her. As two guards escorted them out, Kale looked down at Lyra. She wasn't the silent, frightened child he'd been trying to save anymore. She was a giant in her own right, with a voice she had sharpened into a weapon. "You were amazing in there," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "I had no idea you knew all that legal stuff." Laura looked down at the floor, her voice quiet but strong. "I wasn't sure I was remembering it correctly," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But when I heard them say they were sending me back to Varkon, I just had to do something. The words, they just came to me." "They were the exact right words," Kyle assured her, his voice warm with pride. "You bought us some time, but this evaluation isn't going to be easy. Varkon will do everything in his power to make you fail." A flicker of fear crossed Lyra's face. "I know, but we'll be ready for him, right?" "You know it," Kyle promised. "We have until tomorrow. We'll figure this out. Together." The neutral quarters were a tiny, sterile sanctuary. Just 2 rooms with basic furniture designed for any species. Security guards were posted right outside the door, supposedly for their protection, but Kyle knew they were also there to make sure he and Lyra didn't try to make a run for it. The second they were alone, Lyra seemed to fold in on herself. The brave warrior from the courtroom vanished, replaced by a completely drained little girl. She sank onto the edge of a cot, her shoulders slumped, her hands twisting in her lap. "Hey, you okay?" Kyle asked softly, sitting down next to her. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice so quiet he could barely hear her. "If I fail this test, they'll give me back to him. He'll put another one of those things in my head, or something so much worse." Kyle's heart shattered for her. "You are not going to fail," he said with absolute conviction. "You're obviously a person. You proved that to everyone in that room today." "But Varkon has money and influence," Lyra whispered, her eyes staring at nothing. "He can pay off the panel. He can fake the evidence. He's done it before." "Then we'll be ready for that too," Kyle insisted, his voice a solid anchor in her storm. "You have to tell me everything. What kind of stuff is on this test? What will they ask? How will they try to trick me?" Laura took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm her nerves. "The evaluation is broken into 4 parts, based on the Accord's definition of personhood: self-awareness, complex language, abstract thought, and a moral compass." "And you think you can handle all 4? Kyle asked, watching her face closely. "The first 2 won't be a problem," she said, more to herself than to him. "And abstract thought is fine. I was training to be a technician before I was captured, and I've been solving mechanical puzzles in that factory for years. It's the morality part. That's really hard to prove in a test. They'll probably use riddles or hypothetical scenarios." "Okay, then we practice," Kyle said, his tone shifting to gentle but firm. "I'll be the evaluator. I'm going to throw the toughest questions and most impossible situations I can think of at you, and we are going to nail your answers." Laura nodded, a spark of the fire he'd seen in the courtroom returning to her eyes. "Okay, that would help a lot." And for the next several hours, that's exactly what they did. Kyle presented her with every scenario he could dream up, and Laura's answers were so insightful and wise, it was staggering to think she was so young. Her spirit was unbreakable, her responses revealing a profound character forged in years of hardship. During a short break, he couldn't help but ask, "How did you do it? How did you survive all that time, with that suppressor messing with your mind, being treated like you were nothing?" Laura's eyes looked far away, her voice soft but solid as steel. "I remembered," she said simply. "Every single day, I just held on to who I was. My name, my home, my family. Even when that device made my mind feel like I was wading through thick syrup, I never, ever let them take me away from myself." "Your family," Kyle repeated gently, a fierce, protective wave washing over him. "Are they still on Zephyr 4? "I don't know," Laura admitted, a shadow of deep sorrow crossing her features. "I was just a little girl when they took me. I remember my parents. They were engineers who worked on the giant weather stabilizers. We lived in a city of tall spires with gardens on every balcony. But I have no idea if they're still there, or if they're even alive." It hurt Kyle to see the raw grief in her eyes. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. "If we win tomorrow," he said, his voice filled with determination, "we are going to find them." Her dark eyes locked onto his, searching for a reason to believe. "And if we can't find them, you're staying with me," Kyle added, his tone leaving no room for argument. "For as long as you want." A small smile graced Laura's lips, the very first one Kyle had ever seen. It was fragile, but it lit her up from the inside. "I'd like that." As night fell across the station, pure exhaustion finally took over. The stress of the day, on top of the strain of talking so much after years of forced silence, had completely wiped her out. She fell asleep right there on the cot, still dressed in her blue jumpsuit, clutching the silver name badge like it was a life raft. Kyle carefully pulled a blanket over her and settled into the room's single chair to keep watch. He had a bad feeling that Varkun wouldn't take the judge's decision lying down. Way too much was on the line. If Laura was legally recognized as a person, Varkun's entire illegal empire could come crashing down. His instincts were right. A little after midnight, his personal datapad vibrated with a silent warning. Someone was attempting an unauthorized override on the apartment's security lock. Kyle was on his feet in a second, moving silently toward the door. He slapped the emergency alert, notifying the guard posted right outside. The door hissed open, but it wasn't security. It was 2 men in plain clothes holding blasters, and they definitely weren't there to talk. Before they could even raise their weapons, station security flooded in from the hallway, their own weapons drawn. "Hands where I can see them now," the lead officer ordered. "You are in violation of station security protocols." The intruders froze, then slowly raised their hands. One of them shot Kyle a look of pure, seething hatred. "Varkon gets what belongs to him," the man snarled. "This is not over." "Take them to the detention level," the officer commanded, then turned to Kyle. "We're doubling your security detail for the rest of the night. My apologies for the security breach." "Thank you," Kyle said, his voice steady despite the hammer in his chest. He turned to see Laura sitting bolt upright on the cot, her eyes wide and fixed on him. "They came for me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They tried," Kyle corrected her firmly, "and they failed, and they're going to keep on failing. I promised I wouldn't let them take you again, didn't I?" She nodded, but he could still see the terror in her eyes. "Kyle, what if we win, but Varkon never stops? What if he just hunts us forever?" It was the same fear that had been gnawing at him. "Then we'll always be one step ahead," he said, the plan cementing itself in his mind. "The Starforge isn't the fastest ship in the galaxy, but she's dependable. We'll keep moving, pick up jobs in different systems, and just stay off the radar until we find somewhere completely safe." "A life on the run," Laura said, the words hanging heavy in the small room. "For a little while, maybe," Kyle admitted. "But not forever. If that panel rules that you're a person, it changes the whole game. Varkon could face serious galactic charges for what he did to you and the others. He's not invincible." His words seemed to land, and he saw some of the tension leave her shoulders as she settled back onto the cot. "We should try to sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's a big day." Kyle went back to his chair, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. He spent the rest of the night running through backup plans, mapping out escape routes, and preparing for every possible move to keep LRA safe if the ruling went against them. Because no matter what some panel of strangers decided, he was never, ever letting them put her back in chains. Morning arrived way too soon. Station security escorted them to a new chamber, this one much larger and more intimidating than the last. In the center of the room sat a curved bench where a panel of 5 individuals from 5 different species was seated. Officer John was in the middle, joined by 4 others, including a human woman with silver hair and a kind, weathered face that seemed to hold a lifetime of wisdom. "The sentience evaluation for the individual designated Laura Vera will now begin," John announced, his voice booming in the quiet hall. "In accordance with Article 7 of the Galactic Autonomy Accord, this evaluation will test 4 benchmarks: self-awareness, language complexity, abstract reasoning, and moral agency." Laura walked to the center of the room, her back ramrod straight, a perfect mask for the terror Kyle knew she was feeling inside. She was still wearing the plain blue jumpsuit, and the silver name badge shone on her chest next to the navigator's pin Kyle had given her. They were the only 2 things in the entire universe she could call her own, 2 tiny symbols of the life she was fighting so hard to reclaim. "Please, have a seat," said the human evaluator, her voice gentle but firm. Elra sat down in the enormous chair, her small feet dangling a few inches from the floor. Kyle was shown to a bench along the wall, close enough to be a silent support, but strictly forbidden to speak. "My name is Dr. Celine Vaughn," the woman said, her tone professional yet warm. "I specialize in xenopsychology and sentience assessment. This hearing is being recorded for the official record. Do you consent?" "I do, Dr. Vaughn." Laura's voice came through, startlingly firm and clear. "Good. Let's start with who you are. State your full name and what you can recall about your early life." Laura took a small, steadying breath. "My name is Laura Vera. I was born on Zephyr 4, in a city called Kellam. My parents were Vaughn and Solara, both atmospheric engineers. I was taken from them when I was 3 standard years old." "And how old are you now, in your estimation?" Dr. Vaughn asked. 9 standard years, Laura replied. "My species, Cerulean, ages much like humans do." Dr. Vaughn made a quick note on her datapad with a nod. The first test is to establish self-awareness. LRA, could you describe yourself? I don't just mean what you look like, but who you feel you are inside. Laura paused, her eyes fixed and thoughtful. I am a cerulean child who lived through something that should have broken me, she started, her voice filled with a quiet power. I'm smart. I pay attention to things others miss, and I believe that knowledge and memory are precious. I love to build things to see how they tick. I also have feelings. I know fear, but I also know hope, gratitude, and anger. Laura Vera pressed on, her voice a small but unyielding light in the sterile room. I have things I love and things I can't stand. I love solving mechanical puzzles and studying complex systems. I hate being trapped in small dark places, and I hate the feeling of not being allowed to speak my own truth. Dr. Celine Vaughn leaned in, her silver hair catching the light. Do you see a future for yourself? Can you picture a life for yourself once you walk out of this room? Laura met the doctor's gaze without flinching, her voice absolute. Yes. I want to find my family, or maybe start a new one. I want to learn everything about engineering. I want to help others who've been hurt like I was. I can imagine so many possible futures for myself, all depending on the choices I'm given. Dr. Vaughn gave a slow nod, a look of profound respect crossing her features as she jotted down another note. The second marker is linguistic complexity, she said. You are speaking Galactic Standard right now. Is that the first language you learned? No, Laura said, her voice unwavering. My native tongue is Cerulean. I picked up Standard from my parents, and then later from listening to the overseers at the processing facility. I think in both languages, but for very big ideas, Cerulean just fits better. Can you show us? Dr. Vaughn asked softly. Laura began to speak, and a stream of breathtaking musical sounds poured into the room. It was like hearing a forgotten melody, flowing and lyrical, with tonal shifts that were totally alien to Kyle. That was a formal greeting, she said after a moment, a hint of pride in her tone. It roughly means, I acknowledge the spirit within you, and I offer you my own in return. Dr. Vaughn made another note, her expression one of pure fascination. The third test is for abstract thought, she went on. I'm going to give you a theoretical scenario, and I want you to talk me through your solution. She described a difficult situation. A space station's life support was failing, supplies were running out, and the people on board all had different, competing demands. Laura sat perfectly still as she listened. Then she started to take the problem apart, one piece at a time. Her mind was like a surgical laser, slicing through every issue, calculating probabilities, and building a solution that was not only brilliant, but also profoundly compassionate. Your reasoning is flawless, Dr. Vaughn noted, a small smile playing on her lips. And now, the last test. Moral choice. This isn't just about telling right from wrong. It's about showing that you'd act on that knowledge. She leaned in just a bit. Elara, if this panel legally recognizes you as a person, what duties would you have to other people? What principles would guide your life? Lara fell silent, thinking over the enormous weight of the question. I would have a responsibility to honor the freedom and worth of every other living creature, she finally said, her words measured and thoughtful. I would have to try not to cause pain, and to fix any pain I might cause by mistake. I would be obligated to stand up against injustice, especially the kind I've known, and to shield anyone who is as defenseless as I was. Her eyes flicked to Kyle for a brief moment, filled with a look of deep thanks. I've learned that kindness is a choice you make. And when someone gives you that kindness, like Kyle gave me, it becomes your job to share it with someone else. The panel members grilled her for another hour, throwing sharp, complex questions her way. But Laura was a rock. answering with a kind of wisdom that felt ancient for a 9-year-old. A wisdom born from surviving the unthinkable. Finally, Officer Jean announced the panel would convene to make their decision. Elora walked over to Kyle, and her small hand found his as they sat in the thick, nerve-wracking silence. "That was amazing," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I've never heard anyone speak like you." "I just told them what was true," she replied, her voice soft but strong as steel. "Now we just have to wait." The wait, thankfully, wasn't long. The panel returned in under 30 minutes, their expressions giving nothing away. "The evaluation panel has come to a unanimous conclusion," John stated, and it felt like the entire room stopped breathing. "Based on the standards of the Galactic Autonomy Accord, the individual known as Laura Vera has provided undeniable proof of sentience across all 4 required categories." Her fingers tightened around Kyle's as the verdict was read. For her whole life, Laura had been nothing more than an object, a piece of inventory to be traded. But this single declaration was about to change her entire universe. If you've ever found yourself rooting for the little guy against all odds, you need to stick around for what happens next. The judge's voice rang out. "Laura Vera is hereby declared a sentient being, entitled to all associated rights and protections. This judgment overrides any previous classification as property or a commercial good. The ownership claim by Varcon Industries is therefore rejected." A huge wave of relief washed over Kyle, making him feel lightheaded. Beside him, Laura was frozen, almost as if she thought moving would break the spell. But then another voice sliced through the quiet. "And furthermore," Dr. Vaughn added sharply, "based on the testimony we've heard today, I am submitting a formal petition for a full investigation into Varcon Industries for possible breaches of the Galactic Autonomy Accord, specifically concerning their handling of individuals from Elora's species." In the back of the chamber, Varan, the slick corporate executive who had tried to claim LRA, shot to his feet, his face a storm cloud of rage. "This isn't finished," he snarled, his voice a low threat. "The financial fallout from this will be astronomical, and my lawyers will be taking this to the Sector Governance Board." The judge offered a slight nod. "That is your right. But until any appeal is processed, this court's decision stands. Elara Vera is a free individual, at liberty to decide her own path." Varan's glare was a poison dart aimed right at Laura, a silent vow that he would get even. He then turned sharply and marched out of the room, his footsteps echoing like a coming storm. As people started to file out, Dr. Vaughn came up to them. "You must be very, very careful," she said in a low, urgent tone. "Varan's talk of an appeal is not an empty threat. He has friends in high places on that board. Our decision is solid legally, but politics can make a mockery of justice." "What are you trying to tell us?" Kyle asked, a tight knot of fear forming in his gut. "I'm telling you to be smart," Dr. Vaughn said. "This ruling means he can't own Elora anymore, but it doesn't stop him from trying to make sure she never gets the chance to testify against his company." "We understand," Laura said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you for being so honorable, Dr. Vaughn." The doctor gave her a warm, gentle smile. "This wasn't about honor. It was about the simple truth. You are, without a doubt, a person, Laura Vera. I truly hope you find the future that you've more than earned." She paused for a moment. "And if you ever decide you want a formal education, please get in touch with me. I know of several universities that would be privileged to have a student with your mind." After Dr. Vaughn left, security officers led Kyle and Elora back to their ship, the Starforge. Even with Varan's threat hanging over them, a deep feeling of being safe finally began to sink in. Once they were back on board, it was like years of stress just melted away from Elora. She moved with a new lightness, a quiet self-assurance, as she touched the ship's controls like she was seeing them for the very first time. "So what's next?" she asked, her big, dark eyes looking up at Kyle. He thought about it for a second. Well, for once, that's completely your call. We could try to find your family back on Zephyr 4, or we could just lay low for a bit. You know, pick up some repair work and let things cool off with Varkon. Laura's fingers lightly brushed the letters on her own identification tag as she considered her options. I want to find my family, she decided. But I also know Varkon isn't going to just give up. He'll lose his whole empire if more of my people speak out. Then we'll stay on the move, Kyle said firmly. We'll take jobs, build up our savings, and stay under the radar. We can still look for your family, but we'll do it carefully, using secure channels. I bet Dr. Vaughn could even give us some pointers on that. So what happens if we actually find them? LRA asked, her voice shaking with a tiny bit of hope. Well, then it's up to you, Kyle said, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his own stomach. You could go back to them. He let the possibility linger, but LRA was already there. Or I could stay with you. It's my choice. Yeah, Kyle managed to smile, the worry on his face softening. It will always be your choice. For the next few days, they got the Starforge ready to fly. Kyle picked up some quick repair jobs around the station, Nexus Haven, just to get some extra cash for fuel and supplies. LRA was right by his side the whole time, turning out to be an amazing mechanic. Her small fingers moved with such speed, and her intuition was so sharp, she was often finishing tasks before he was. But on day 4, their ship got a call from someone they never expected to see again. It was Corin, the very same technician who'd removed the mind control device from LRA's brain. I heard what you two pulled off in that courtroom, he said after Kyle let him aboard. Seriously impressive. Not a lot of people go up against Varkon and come out on top. The truth was on our side, LRA replied, her voice sounding stronger than it had in weeks. Corin's metallic face twitched into something like a smirk. Truth is a paper shield in this system, kid. You had nerve. That's what counts. He looked over at Kyle, his complex eyes turning dead serious. But nerve won't stop a laser blast. Varan is a nasty piece of work. He doesn't forget people who cost him millions. We're leaving soon, Kyle told him. Gonna jump between a few systems, keep our heads down. Good call, Corin said, his tone changing. Listen, I didn't just swing by to warn you, he continued, a new light flickering in his optical sensors. I came to give you something. He pulled a sleek, dark gadget from a pouch on his belt. This is a neural shield. It's a prototype, but it works. It'll stop anyone from ever sticking another control chip in your head like the one I took out. LRA looked at the device, her expression wary. How does it do that? She asked. It puts out a low-level frequency field around you, Corin explained. It scrambles the signals those suppressors use to operate. It's harmless to you, but it'll fry their tech. Kyle glanced at the device, feeling both grateful and suspicious. Why are you doing all this for us? Corin's metallic features seemed to soften. I've seen what they do to kids like her, he said, his voice dropping low. Kids with those things wired directly into their brains, their whole lives stolen. I take them out when I can, but for everyone I save, they hook up 10 more. He looked directly at LRA. This whole court case, it's a real shot at stopping them for good. But that only works if you're around to testify, to show the whole galaxy what Varkon really does. He gently placed the neural shield in her hands. So you need to survive. You need to tell your story. You need to blow this whole corrupt system wide open. LRA's fingers closed around the small device, her face hardening with an iron resolve. I will, she promised, and it sounded like a sacred vow. After Corin left, it was a mad dash to get off Nexus Haven. The weight of the neural shield in her pocket was a constant reminder that they were still being hunted. The Starforge slipped away from the station just before dawn, a ghost in the shadows. Kyle had lined up a job for them fixing atmospheric processors on a backwater mining colony 2 systems away, the last place Varkon would ever think to search. As the ship silently pulled into deep space, LRA sat in the co-pilot's seat, her gaze lost in the countless stars that were beginning to appear. "I never saw the stars from inside the factory," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. "It was just concrete and machines. I'd almost forgotten they were real." Kyle glanced over at her, his heart aching for the simple beauty she had been denied. "They were always out here," he said softly, "just waiting for you to come see them again." "Like me," LRA said, her eyes still on the endless dark. "I was always in there, somewhere, even when I couldn't find a way out." "Exactly like that," Kyle agreed, feeling a huge sense of pride swell in his chest. The next few months fell into a comfortable routine. They hopped from one system to the next, finding just enough repair work to keep the ship fueled and their stomachs full. LRA's gift for mechanics exploded. She went from being a fast learner to a complete prodigy, sometimes figuring out what was wrong with a system before Kyle even had his tools out. Soon enough, she was handling smaller jobs all on her own, her little hands confidently navigating complex systems in a way that just amazed him. They asked around about her family on Zephyr 4, but it was a complete dead end. The facility her parents had worked at was shut down years ago, and every single employee record had been wiped. It was as if someone had deliberately tried to make the Vera family disappear. But even with that crushing disappointment, LRA's spirit shone brighter than ever. The quiet, haunted girl he'd found in the marketplace was gone, replaced by a witty and brilliant young engineer who surprised him every single day. Of course, she still had her bad days, sometimes waking up from nightmares where she was trapped in her own mind again. But they were becoming less and less frequent. They steered clear of any sector that had a Varkon Industries logo, but they still heard news snippets. The investigation Dr. Vaughn had started was moving at a snail's pace, bogged down by corporate lawyers. Varkon's appeal had been approved, but the review board was in no hurry to make a ruling. About 6 months after they fled Nexus Haven, they took a contract to fix the life support on an old research station orbiting a massive gas giant. Being this far out in the middle of nowhere was a welcome break from constantly looking over their shoulders. The job itself was simple, but then they saw him, and their blood ran cold. It was another Cerulean, the first one they had seen since they rescued LRA. He was a maintenance worker, one of the few people on the station, but his uniform had a chilling barcode stamped across his chest. His walk was stiff, robotic. His face was a blank slate, and when he talked, his voice was monotone and empty. LRA clutched Kyle's arm as they passed him in a hallway. "He has a suppressor," she whispered, the words choked with a familiar terror. "I recognize that look. The way he moves, the emptiness in his eyes. That was me. That's what I looked like." Kyle stared at the man, a sick feeling twisting in his gut. "Do you think Corin's shield would work on him?" Kyle asked. "If we can get close enough, definitely," LRA said without a hint of doubt. "But we'd still need to get the suppressor out. I'm not sure we have the right tools for that." For the next several days, they watched the Cerulean as they worked. He was like a machine, performing his duties in total silence, giving only short, pre-programmed responses, showing no spark of who he was underneath. On their 4th day, LRA came to find Kyle, a fire burning in her eyes. "We have to do something," she said, her voice solid as steel. "We can't just leave him like this." "LRA, this is a huge risk," Kyle warned, his mind racing. "If his owners find out, they'll have Varkon on our tail in a heartbeat." "I know," LRA replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But look at him, Kyle." That was me. That hollowed-out, empty feeling, like you're not even a person anymore. Nobody should have to feel like that. Kyle took a long, deep breath. She was 100% right. "Okay, but we're going to need a really good plan." They came up with a strategy to corner the Cerulean during his rounds in an empty part of the station. LRA would use the shield to knock out the suppressor's signal just long enough for them to talk to him, to get him to come back to the Starforge, where they had converted the med bay into a makeshift operating room. The plan went off without a hitch. The moment LRA activated the shield, the effect was instantaneous. The man stumbled back, grabbing his head as his eyes suddenly blinked into sharp focus. "Who?" he gasped, his voice raspy. "What's going on?" "You have a neural suppressor in your head," LRA said urgently. "This device is jamming it, but it won't last. We can get it out, but you have to come with us. Right now. Trust us." The cerulean stared at her, and a flicker of understanding crossed his face. "You're like me, but you're not." "No," said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Not anymore, and you don't have to be either." He didn't need much more convincing. Once he was on the Starforge, Kyle's medical scanner found the suppressor, an exact match to the one from LRA's head, right at the base of his skull. "I saw Corin do this once," Kyle whispered, looking at the scan. "But I'm not a doctor." "I remember everything," LRA said, her calm voice grounding him. "Every single detail. I'll walk you through it." The procedure was nerve-wracking, but with LRA's perfect memory guiding Kyle's steady hands, it was a complete success. They switched off and removed the tiny piece of tech, and just like that, the cerulean's mind was his own again. The man who told them his name was Torin simply broke down, crying as 8 years of buried memories and feelings came rushing back. "How long were you?" LRA asked him gently once he had calmed down a bit in the ship's lounge. 8 years, Torin answered, his voice getting stronger. "I was an environmental scientist. They took me from my research lab on Zephyr 4, put this thing in my head, and I've been treated like a piece of property ever since." "Zephyr 4? Kyle repeated, shooting a look at LRA. "Did you happen to know a pair of engineers there named Vera? They worked on atmospheric processors." Torin's eyes went wide. "Vaughn and Solera? Of course I worked with them. They disappeared right after a corporate takeover, along with their little girl." His eyes snapped to LRA, and everything clicked into place. "You're their daughter, Lyra. You have your mother's eyes." The words hit Lyra like a physical blow, sucking the air right out of her lungs. Hope and grief crashed over her in a dizzying wave. "They're alive? Where are they?" "They were when they took me," Torin said, picking his words carefully. "They were reassigned, a Black Ops project on some outer moon. The official story was that they were terminated, but I never bought it. Vaughn and Solera were too brilliant to just get tossed aside." "Brilliant how?" Kyle asked, stepping closer. "They were on the verge of a breakthrough in atmospheric processing," Torin explained. "A system so clean it would have changed everything. The corporations wanted it, but your parents were going to release it open source for any world that needed it. After you disappeared, they just broke. They did whatever they were told, clinging to the hope that they might find you again." A storm of emotions washed over Lyra's face. "They're out there looking for me, and I'm out here looking for them. We're both just lost." "Not anymore," Kyle said, his voice firm, a rock in the storm. "Now we have a direction. Torin, do you know which moon?" "Cryon 9, Torin said without a moment's hesitation. "The ice moon. They have a research facility buried deep under the surface." It was the biggest lead they'd had in 6 long months, but it was also a massive problem. Cryon 9 was deep in territory controlled by the very corporations that saw her people as property, the same ones backing Varkon's legal battle to own them. "We can't just fly into Cryon 9, Kyle said later that night, after a drained Torin had finally collapsed into sleep. "That's walking right into the lion's den." "I know," Lyra whispered, the ache in her voice impossible to hide. "But they're alive, Kyle, and they're looking for me. We have to try." That night, huddled together on the Starforge, the 3 of them sketched out impossible plans, trying to find a way to navigate the hostile space between them and Cryon 9. By morning, they had a plan. It was reckless, probably insane, but it was a chance. First, they had to get off the research outpost without anyone realizing Torin was gone. That part, surprisingly, was the easiest. Kyle marched straight to the station administrator, spinning a story about a critical failure in the life support system. "The main exchanger's containment seals are completely shot, way beyond safety specs," he said, rattling off a stream of technical jargon. "We have to fabricate new parts back on our ship before the whole system goes critical. It's a two-person job, so we'll need to borrow your maintenance tech to give us a hand." The administrator, terrified of a catastrophic system failure and seeing Torin as nothing more than a piece of equipment, agreed instantly. A few hours later, their ship was pulling away, with Torin's official record updated to show he was on loan for a high-level repair mission. Their next move was to contact Dr. Celine Vaughn, the woman who had offered Lyra her only ray of hope. They sent a carefully coded message through a secure channel, explaining their situation and asking for any intel she had on Cryon 9. 3 days later, while they were drifting in the shadow of an asteroid to save fuel and watch for anyone following them, a reply from Dr. Vaughn finally lit up their console. "The Cryon facility is very real," her message read. "It's a classified research station under heavy security. Ownership is hidden under a mountain of shell corporations. But I've traced a few threads back to Varkon Industries. A direct assault is impossible," she continued. "But the station gets regular supply shipments. The next one is scheduled in about 1 standard month. I'm sending coordinates and ship identifiers on a separate, encrypted channel. Be careful. My own investigation is moving slowly. Varun's appeal is still tied up in court. Vaughn out." Just like she promised, the supply ship's coordinates and ID codes appeared moments later. It was a razor-thin opportunity. "We could try to intercept the supply ship," Kyle suggested, poring over the data with Lyra and Torin. "Use its access codes to get close to the base." "Too risky," Torin shot back, his mind already sharp and clear. "Those supply ships are tracked from the moment they launch. If we're off the flight plan by even a minute, every alarm on that moon will light up." "What if we hide on the ship?" Lyra proposed, her eyes gleaming with the idea. "If we can sneak aboard before it gets to Cryon 9, we could slip out while they're unloading cargo." Kyle considered it, his mind racing. "That could actually work, but we'd need to know its entire flight path and find the perfect spot to intercept it, not to mention getting past their security scanners." "Most supply ships heading to black sites use automated scanners to detect stowaways," Torin added, his tone calm and professional. They spent the next few days hashing out the plan, pinpointing intercept locations, and brainstorming how to fool the security systems. Torin's inside knowledge of corporate security was priceless, and Lyra's knack for electronics was getting better every hour, her fingers becoming as nimble on a circuit board as Kyle's were on a control panel. The Starforge itself needed some work. They installed better stealth systems, boosted their short-range sensors, and rigged a secure docking clamp to latch onto another vessel without being noticed. Kyle dove into the engineering, glad to have something to keep his hands busy while his mind churned with the dangers ahead. Lyra was right beside him, her skills now the perfect match for his own. Can you imagine being told your parents were gone forever, only to discover they're being held as slaves in a secret ice prison? For a young woman named Lyra, that nightmare was real, and she was about to risk everything to get them back. With a makeshift crew and a repurposed ship, she was ready to do the impossible. You're going to want to stick around to see how this tiny team plans to take on a massive, evil corporation. Together, they had turned an old freighter into the Dawn Spark, a name for the new beginning they all desperately needed. Their target was a supply ship called the Stellar Hauler. The plan was to catch it 3 days after it left the main shipping lanes, right before it entered the forbidden Cryon system. The plan went off without a hitch, which immediately set Kyle on edge. They used their stealth drive to sneak up on the hauler, docking at an unmanned emergency port near the stern. Torin, who knew the layout of these corporate ships like the back of his hand, led the way. He used a modified plasma cutter to slice through the outer seal, making a clean cut they could seal on their way out. Within minutes, they were inside a cargo bay filled with containers destined for the secret prison. "This is way too easy," Kyle whispered, his eyes scanning the empty, unguarded hold. "Where's all the security?" Torin checked his scanner. "Internal sensors are active," he confirmed, "but they're focused on the containers, not the space around them." "Standard anti-theft tech," Lyra concluded, her voice crisp over the comms. "They aren't expecting stowaways out here. Why would they? Officially, this place doesn't even exist." Kyle's voice was grim. "Nobody knew about it, except for the doctor who tipped us off, and anyone she might have told." They worked fast, building a small hideout in a gap between two huge containers and lining it with sensor-dampening fabric to make them invisible. The 3-day trip was going to be cramped and miserable, but they'd all survived worse. They hunkered down for the long, quiet ride, taking shifts on watch. Lyra clutched the two things that mattered most: a small pouch on her belt holding a powerful neural shield, and a comms device that could punch through any jamming field. As they got closer, the ship's engines began to whine, shifting into their landing sequence. Peeking through a tiny crack, they saw Cryon 9 for the first time. A perfect, sterile white ball hanging in the blackness of space. "The base is underground," Torin whispered, running through the plan one last time. "The entrance will be hidden to look like a cave or something. Get ready." The landing was perfectly smooth. As the cargo bay doors hissed open, a blast of brutally cold air rushed into their hiding spot. They watched as figures in heavy environmental suits began unloading cargo onto a landing dock cut directly out of the ice. Lyra's heart sank when she saw several of her own people, the Ceruleans, working with the crew, each one with a barcode branded on their uniform. "More of our people," she breathed, her voice thick with sorrow. "They're using them like droids." Torin put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We'll get them out too. But we have to find your parents first. Stay focused." They waited for the perfect moment, then slipped out from behind the containers, grabbing a couple of empty enviro suits that were sitting near an airlock. The disguises were perfect. They blended right in with the other workers on the dock. What if your entire life was a lie? Imagine being told your parents died in a tragic accident, leaving you to be raised as an orphan by a cold, faceless mega-corporation. For 15 years, that wasn't a what-if for Lyra. It was her reality. She was just another asset, another number on a spreadsheet. Until one day, she found a hidden file on her dad's old datapad. It was a message that shattered everything she thought she knew. Her parents were alive. They were prisoners on a frozen moon, and she was their only hope. But how does one girl take on an empire that owns entire star systems? If you want to find out how an underdog with nothing to lose can start a revolution, you're in the right place. So stick around. Their helmets hissed shut, and just like that, they were shadows with a mission. Torin vanished toward a terminal to pinpoint her parents, Verin and Solara. Kale peeled off toward a power station, ready to create a distraction if everything went sideways. That left Lyra with the most terrifying job, walking straight into the lion's den. This place was a sterile white nightmare, a maze of labs buried under miles of ice. She forced herself to walk with a confidence she didn't feel, trying to blend in. Every second felt like an hour before Torin's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Got 'em," he said. "Section 14, Lab 7. They're working. 2 guards at the door. Anything hot?" Kale's voice was a low hum. "Quiet as a tomb," Torin replied. "Looks like a regular workday down here. No extra security. You're clear to go." Lyra changed direction, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Years of loneliness, of believing a lie, of searching. It all came down to this moment. She was seconds away from seeing her parents. Lab 7 looked identical to every other door, except for the 2 bored-looking guards flanking it. Lyra took a shaky breath. Her only option was to act like she owned the place. Confidence was her only shield. She walked straight for the door, giving the guards a quick, dismissive nod. One of them immediately put out an arm, stopping her cold. "ID," he grunted. Lyra's heart leaped into her throat. Maintenance, she said, dropping her voice, hoping she sounded convincing. Here to run a diagnostic on the environmental systems. The guard glanced at his wrist pad. Nothing on the schedule for this lab. Her brain scrambled for a lie. Emergency override, she said, trying to sound annoyed. Supervisor flagged a pressure leak in this sector. He wasn't buying it. Don't move, he ordered, turning to a comms panel on the wall. She had maybe 2 seconds. Her hand dove into her pouch, closing around the neural shield. It was a crazy idea, but it was all she had. She flicked it on, pointing it at the panel. With a flash and a fizzle, the panel went dead. While the guards were staring at the fried panel, Lyra shot past them and through the door. The cold air of the lab bit at her face as she ripped off her helmet. Mom? She breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Dad? Varen and Solara were at a console, their movements robotic, perfectly synchronized. They didn't even look up. It was like she was invisible. Her heart shattered. They were puppets, prisoners in their own bodies. Of course. It had to be neural suppressors. They couldn't see her, couldn't hear her. Swallowing a sob, she raised the neural shield again, aiming its energy wave right at them. The change was immediate. Her parents froze, stumbling back like someone had just woken them from a nightmare. They turned, their eyes foggy with confusion, until they saw her. Disbelief washed over their faces. What? Her father managed, his voice a dry rasp. Then his eyes locked on hers. No, it can't be, her mother whispered, a trembling hand reaching out. Lyra? Is that you, sweetheart? It's me, Lyra cried, the tears finally breaking free. Just then, the lab door slammed open. It was Kale. We're blown! We have to go now! He yelled. They got Torin! The whole base is locking down! Her parents just stared, lost in the sudden chaos. Who is this? Her father asked, instinctively stepping in front of Lyra. He's a friend, she said, the words tumbling out. He helped me find you. They've had you under control with devices in your heads. We have to get to our ship before they trap us here. The lie about her death, the stolen years, it all came crashing down on them as they sprinted after Kale through the corridors. And that's when the idea hit Lyra. Just escaping wasn't enough. They had to fight back. Kale, she gasped. Can you hook the shield up to the main comms tower? His eyes widened. It was a reckless, insane, beautiful idea. While Kale frantically hotwired the shield, Lyra stood guard. Then she slammed the activation switch, sending a wave of freedom across the entire moonbase. All over the facility, hundreds of enslaved workers stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes clearing as a decade-long fog lifted from their minds. A moment of silence, and then chaos erupted. They made it to the hangar bay just as alarms blared to life. They scrambled up the ramp of their ship, the Dawn Spark, just as the hatch sealed behind them. As their ship lifted off, a full-blown rebellion was exploding below. Later, safe in the quiet of their ship, Lyra sat with her parents, the suppressors finally gone for good. Her mother, Solara, gently touched her cheek, looking at her as if she were a ghost. You came for us, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. All this time, we thought we'd lost you forever. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes. I never gave up on you, she said, her own voice cracking. They put a suppressor on me too, when I was little, to try and make me forget. But I never let go of your faces, that one memory. It kept me going. Together, they watched the ice moon shrink to a bright dot in the viewport. They hadn't just escaped, they had lit a fire. Their revenge wasn't about payback. It was about liberation. And they made a promise right then and there. They were free, and they would be back to free everyone else. Because hope, they finally understood, was the one thing you can never truly lock away. Imagine being told your parents died, only to find out 15 years later they've been enslaved by the most powerful corporation in the galaxy. That was Lyra's reality, and she was about to burn their entire empire to the ground to get her family back. But first, she had to escape. Just as Torin had warned, the hunt was on. 2 sleek corporate interceptors blasted off the moon, their weapon ports glowing ominously as they tore through the void straight for them. "Going dark," Kale said, his voice unbelievably calm as his hands danced over the controls. The Dawn Spark, their little ship, surged forward on engines that were so illegal they practically screamed, easily leaving the patrol ships in the dust. The cloaking field they'd installed kicked in, scrambling the enemy's sensors. Just another little surprise. "They're launching drones!" Torin's voice yelled from the engine room. "These things are designed to sniff out cloaked ships." "Yeah, I see 'em," Kale replied, his focus absolute as he threw the ship into a gut-wrenching evasive maneuver. The small vessel weaved through the first wave of drones like a ghost. Lyra, who had logged thousands of hours in a flight simulator for this exact scenario, dropped into the co-pilot's seat, her face a mask of pure concentration. "We have to hit that jump point," she said, her eyes locked on the nav screen. "Once we're in hyperspace, they can't follow us without our exact coordinates." "Working on it," Kale snapped back, his knuckles white on the controls. "But these drones are on us like a swarm of angry bees." A series of heavy clunks echoed through the ship as several drones latched onto the hull. "They're trackers!" Torin screamed over the comms. "If we jump with those things attached, they'll follow us to the end of the universe!" Kale's mind raced. "Protocol 7. Lyra, you ready?" "Born ready," she shot back, her fingers already flying across her own console. "Local EMP. It'll knock our own systems out for a second, but it'll fry those trackers into scrap metal." A blinding, silent wave of blue energy erupted from the ship. Just like they'd practiced, the Dawn Spark systems died for one terrifying, heart-stopping moment, plunging them into a dead, black silence. But outside, the drones attached to their hull sparked and popped, their circuits completely fried as they tumbled away into space. "Systems are coming back online," Lyra announced as the screens flickered to life. "I've got the jump point locked. Those corporate ships are still coming, but they're falling behind." "All right, initiating jump sequence," Kale called out. "Everyone, hang on. This is gonna get bumpy." The Dawn Spark began to shudder violently as the hyperdrive spun up, literally bending space around them. For one awful second, it looked like the interceptors would get one last shot off, their laser fire sizzling past the shields in angry red streaks. Then, with a final, massive lurch, the Dawn Spark winked out of existence, leaving Cryanu 9 and all its rotten secrets a dimension away. In the strange, quiet peace of hyperspace, they all finally met in the ship's small common room. With Lyra helping, Kale carefully removed the neural suppressors from her parents' heads. The procedure was tense and delicate, but it worked. As her parents slowly came back to themselves, they told their story, and the big reveal changed everything. They described being ripped away from Lyra, being told she had died, and being forced to work on terraforming machines meant to heal broken worlds. But the corporation had twisted their beautiful creation into a monster, a weapon that could control an entire planet's people by controlling the very air they breathed. Solara pulled Lyra into an embrace so tight it hurt, tears of grief and joy streaming down her face. "We never, ever lost hope we'd find you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Even with those things trying to erase you from our minds, a part of us remembered. It's the only thing that kept us alive." Lyra hugged her mother back, her own voice quiet but strong. "And I never stopped looking for you. Even when they stole my childhood, I held on to your names." Days later, drifting in the silent currents of hyperspace, they were a family again, but they were also fugitives. They had no destination, but they had a mission clearer than any star chart: stay free and make sure everyone in the galaxy knew Varkon Industries for the monsters they were. One evening, sharing a simple meal, Varun finally broke the silence. "So what's our next move?" he asked, looking between Lyra and Kale. "We're free, which is great, but we're also the most wanted people in this entire sector. Where can we possibly go?" Kale thought for a moment. "We could find a forgotten world, disappear with new identities." But Torin, who had been quiet until now, slammed his fist on the table. "And let thousands of others go through what we did. Ceruleans like you, and who knows how many other species are being used like spare parts all over the galaxy." Lyra's voice cut through the tension, calm and sharp. "This time, we have proof. We have the suppressors. We have the entire database from that facility that Torin snagged. And we have our stories. We can take this to someone the corporations can't buy." "The Terran Coalition might listen," Kale suggested, a spark of hope in his eyes. "A scandal this big might be exactly what they need to finally break the corporation's stranglehold out here." "That's a huge risk," Solara warned. "The corporations have spies everywhere." They argued late into the night, their fears and hopes filling the small ship. But by the time a new star rose outside their window, they had a decision. They weren't running, they were fighting. They were going to use the truth as a weapon and free every last person trapped in the corporation's claws. First on their list, expose Varkon Industries for what they really were and bring them down for good. Using a heavily encrypted channel, they sent a message to a trusted contact, Dr. Celine Varn, explaining their plan to leak the evidence to the Terran Coalition. A few agonizing days passed before they got a reply. A top-secret meeting was arranged on Solaris Station, a neutral territory orbiting Jupiter. This was their shot. The journey there was a nerve-wracking series of close calls, but they slipped past corporate patrols using fake ID codes and the Dawn Spark stealth tech. And that's when their plan for a quiet little meeting went up in flames. Just before they reached the station, a system-wide emergency alert blared to life on every public channel. The revenge was sweeter than they ever could have dreamed, because the broadcast wasn't from the corporation. It was from them. Torin, the tech genius that he was, had helped Lyra hijack the entire network. "Attention, everyone!" her voice rang out, strong and clear across the stars. "This is not a corporate announcement. This is a declaration of truth. My name is Lyra Vera, and for 15 years, Varkon Industries made me believe my parents were dead. They lied." She broadcast everything: video logs from the facility, scientific data on the suppressors, and the heartbreaking testimony from her parents. Varkon stock didn't just crash. It evaporated in under an hour. The Terran Coalition launched a full-scale investigation, and the systems under Varkon's control erupted in open rebellion. They had won. The happy ending wasn't just for them, it was for thousands of others. And the moral of the story? A single person, armed with the truth, can be more powerful than any corporation in the galaxy. Never let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter. Can you imagine being treated like a tool, your thoughts silenced by a device drilled into your skull, all because some corporate rule decided you weren't a person? That was life for Lyra and every other Cerulean, legally classified as living assets under Quadrant Commerce Protocol 19C. But one broadcast was about to change their entire universe. Huddled around the comms unit, the air buzzing with tension, they heard a formal voice announce that the old classification was officially overturned. All Ceruleans were now recognized as sentient beings, with all the rights that came with it. But do you think the fight is over just because one law changed? Stick around, because changing the rules is one thing, but changing people's hearts is another battle entirely. A stunned silence hung in the air for a moment, before breaking into quiet, joyful tears. Lyra looked at Kale, her eyes bright with a hope she hadn't dared to feel for years. Did we actually do it? Is it over?" Kale managed a small smile, but his voice was cautious. "I don't think it was that simple. Dr. Varn must have made a hell of an argument with the proof we sent her. Torin, ever the realist, chimed in, or the Terran Coalition just saw a golden opportunity. They've been waiting for an excuse to knock the corporations down a few pegs in this sector. The broadcast continued, issuing a direct order for all companies to remove the neural suppressors and provide back pay for all forced labor, promising serious penalties if they didn't comply. Varun, having seen corporate greed up close, was skeptical. They'll drag their feet. They'll find legal loopholes, claim it's too difficult, anything to get out of it. But Solara, pulling her family into a group hug, saw the light. "It's a start," she said, her voice filled with pure relief. "It's a start." "We have a legal right to fight back," Torin said, his gaze sharp. "And we kept copies of all the original files. If they try to ignore the new law, we'll light up the entire network with every violation." Their trip to Solara Station had transformed. It was no longer about finding a safe place to hide. It was about giving this new law teeth. They had a responsibility to help other Keruans make the leap from being someone's property to being their own person, and to make sure the corporations who built fortunes on their backs were finally held accountable. Their ship, the Dawn Spark, was no longer a getaway vessel. It was a mobile liberation front. They jumped from one system to the next, hunting down facilities where Seruans were still being held in chains, and they personally made sure every last neural suppressor was deactivated for good. Sometimes, a firm conversation with an oblivious manager was enough. Other times, it meant a tense standoff with corporate guards, with only Kuran's shimmering energy shield standing between them and total disaster. At every single stop, they did more than just break chains. They gave them the keys to their own freedom. They taught them how to disable the suppressors themselves, how to gather evidence of their illegal captivity, and how to file for the new identities and back pay they were legally owed. News of their work spread like wildfire through the sector's underground channels, and soon the Dawn Spark became a whisper of hope, a legend in the making. Other ships began to join them, independent cargo haulers, corporate whistleblowers with a change of heart, and even a handful of Seruans who'd escaped years ago and had been living in the shadows. 6 months after that one life-changing broadcast, they finally arrived at Solara Station. Their desperate escape mission had snowballed into a full-blown liberation movement. The Terran Coalition officials who greeted them were stunned by the grassroots network they had built, the mountain of fresh evidence they presented, and the tangible impact they had already made. "We can offer you sanctuary," the lead official offered, his eyes filled with genuine respect as he scanned their data. "You can have new homes on any Coalition world, fresh identities if you want them. We even have job openings for you in our xenobiology and engineering departments." Lyra, who had transformed from a terrified victim into a quiet, confident leader during their travels, shared a knowing look with Kale. "We're grateful for the offer, more than you know," she said, her voice warm with sincerity. "But we can't settle down while so many others are still trapped in places the Coalition doesn't even know exist. The Dawn Spark still has work to do." The official gave a slow, admiring nod. "We understand. In that case, let us provide you with unofficial diplomatic papers. They should open a few doors that are currently closed to you. And of course, you'll have our full backing," the Terran official promised. "Technical support, supplies, intel, whatever you need, whenever you need it." Kyle, Lyra, and their growing crew accepted with heartfelt thanks. They seized the opportunity to give the Dawn Spark a complete overhaul in Solara Station's advanced shipyards. When she emerged, she was a whole new ship. Her stealth systems were so sophisticated, she was now a ghost on most sensors. Her medbay was tripled in size to handle rescue operations, and the living quarters were expanded for their new team members. On the day of their departure, Lyra stood on the observation deck, looking out at the magnificent, swirling storm of Jupiter. It was a silent, humbling sight that showed her just how far they'd come. Kale came and stood beside her, sharing the comfortable silence. After a while, he finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Any regrets?" Lyra shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the view. "No, just thinking about how this all started." From a shipping container in a dusty market to all of this. From being labeled defective goods to... She tapped the new pin on her uniform, a Terran Coalition diplomatic seal that shone right next to the simple, silver name tag Kale had made for her. "You were never what they called you," Kale said, his voice gentle but firm. "There was nothing wrong with you. The whole rotten system was defective." A small smile touched Lyra's lips as her fingers lightly traced the name tag. "I was thinking about that other name they gave me. Returned product," she murmured. "It used to fill me with so much shame. It meant I was broken, worthless, passed around like an object. But now..." She took a deep breath, her voice finding a new strength. "I'm going to reclaim it, but I'm giving it a new meaning. Not returned product, but returned power. Because that's what we're doing, right? We're returning power to the people it was stolen from." A look of pure admiration washed over Kale's face. "I love that. The Dawn Spark on a mission of returned power. That's something worth fighting for." As they headed back to the bridge, Lyra thought about the long road ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. The corporations would always find new loopholes, new ways to exploit the vulnerable. They would always have to be one step ahead. But for the first time in her memory, the future didn't feel like a terrifying, dark tunnel. It felt like an open star chart, and she was the one holding the pen. They would spark change one rescue mission, one freed voice, and one small victory at a time. When the Dawn Spark undocked from Silera Station the next morning, its crew had changed. They were no longer desperate fugitives running for their lives. They were pioneers driven by a purpose bigger than any one of them. Their ship was a beacon of hope against an endless night. As the vessel prepared to jump, Lyra took her place at the navigation console. Her hands flew across the controls with a new confidence, charting a course to stars that had once seemed completely unreachable. From the pilot's seat, Kale's voice was full of warmth and trust. "All right, Captain. Where to first?" Lyra keyed in the coordinates for a remote system. Their intelligence network had flagged a mining outpost that was openly defying the new laws, keeping its workers enslaved with neural suppressors. "Right there," she said, her voice radiating a calm, unbreakable resolve. "Let's go bring them home." In a brilliant flash, the Dawn Spark disappeared into hyperspace. A silver streak of hope headed for the forgotten corners of the galaxy. And back on Lyra's console, a small piece of cloth lay waiting. It was a new patch, made to cover the demeaning barcode on her uniform. It didn't represent the scars of her past, but the promise of her future. Stitched in simple, bold letters, it said, "Returned power."